Hey everybody, welcome to CSE Live. I'm Patrick Finnegan, producer of CSE Live here at Black Spectacles, and I'm joined with architect Marissa Yee, who's going to host a discussion on understanding California practice, including the most heavily weighted and commonly misunderstood sections of the CSE, key topics including the Architect's Practice Act, California Building Code, and contract fundamentals, and real-world scenarios that illustrate how these concepts apply in California architectural practice. If you're joining us for the first time, Black Spectacles is the leader in ARE prep. At Black Spectacles, we work with learning scientists and architects to ensure you're studying the right content and that you retain it so you can pass on the first try. We've built everything that you need to pass the CSE with our brand new CSE course, including new video lectures with motion graphics and 3D animation, practice exams that are as close to the real thing as you can get, and unlike anyone else, with our Pass the CSE guarantee, in the unlikely event that you don't pass your exams, we'll pay for you to retake the exam. You'll also receive access to our deck of flashcards, which you can customize, and quizzes after each video section, and detailed content on the hardest parts of the exams. Lastly, our guided study process organizes all of your study material into a daily study plan, showing you what to study each day that you can customize to align with your exam date. And they're all built upon a curriculum that ensures you're learning the right content, and they all work together with our custom-built platform to ensure that you retain the information so you remember it for the exams. With our ARE prep material, our pass rates are 50% higher than the national average, and our members report passing in half the time of the national average. We use the same standards to develop our CSE exams, and we stand behind our work, which is why we offer our CSE guarantee. With our Pass the CSE guarantee, in the unlikely event that you don't pass your exams, we'll pay for you to retake the exam. And we're very excited to announce the launch of our brand new CSE course, designed to help you pass the California Supplemental Exam in record time. You'll get everything you need to pass the CSE on your first try, including expert-crafted California-specific study materials, a practice exam that is as close to the real thing as you can get, customizable flashcards and quizzes, and a structured study plan customized to your exam date. You can join today at blackspectacles.com/CSE-pricing to take advantage of a 10% discount for the first 100 members. And if you're using Black Spectacles through your firm, be sure to let your firm leadership know so they can unlock access for your entire team. Our next CSE Live will be on October 15th, where we'll be covering a CSE mock exam. You can go to blackspectacles.com/podcast/CSE-live to sign up. And we're going to be engaging exclusively on our online Black Spectacles community. So head over to community.blackspectacles.com, and right at the top, you'll see we've pinned a thread called CSE Live, Understanding California Practice. If you have any questions as we go through CSE Live today, post your questions there and we'll answer your questions. And everyone who posts in that thread today will be eligible to win a free Black Spectacles t-shirt. Literally, all you have to do is go over to community.blackspectacles.com and say hi, and you're registered. And of course, don't forget to stay tuned until the end of the episode to see if you've won. And with that, I'd like to introduce our guest today, Marissa Yee. In addition to working with us here at Black Spectacles, Marissa is an architect based in San Francisco. Welcome, Marissa.
Thank you so much, Patrick. So for those of you who may not have listened to our previous episode on CSE Live, we spent some time recapping smart study strategies for the CSE. Specifically, we went over how to reuse your ARE notes to save time and build on what you already know. We discussed why it's important to focus your studying on California-specific topics for the CSE. And we discussed how the Black Spectacles CSE course can help candidates preparing for initial licensure or reciprocity, including a refresher on key ARE concepts. So the Black Spectacles course is not only great for those who have recently taken the ARE, but it'll also provide a refresher for those of you who may have taken the ARE some time ago and are now going for California reciprocity. So for today's discussion, here's what we're going to focus on. We're going to look at the most heavily weighted and commonly misunderstood sections of the CSE, key topics, including the Architect's Practice Act, California Building Code, and contract fundamentals like the B101 and A201. And then we'll discuss some real-world scenarios that illustrate how these concepts apply in California architectural practice. So we're really going to be doing a deep dive into those topics on the CSE that are specific to the CSE. So not content that you would have seen on the AREs, but new. Okay, so as we went over last time, the CSE, even though it's one exam, it's broken into various content areas. So today we're gonna go through each content area. I'm gonna highlight some of the information captured in each content area that will be new information for the CSE. So our first content area is contract development and project planning. And one of the items that you should be focusing your study time on is the Architects Practice Act. This regulates the practice of architecture in California. It actually establishes the California Architects Board to regulate and establish those requirements for licensure in the state, including establishing the California Architects Board to administer the CSE. This Architects Practice Act resides within the California Code of Regulations and is part of California law. So this is an item that you should be aware of. It will include information like ethics, information like how often you would need to renew your license once you become licensed, information on what constitutes bad practice in California, or what would constitute a violation of the Architects Practice Act. So all of that information resides in the Practice Act. Your Black Spectacle CSE course will go over this. You may also want to look at that Architects Practice Act directly to read it. The next content area we're going to look at is schematic design and discretionary approvals. And as a reminder, this content area is the most important content area for the CSE, as it is the most heavily weighted. So most of your questions are going to be coming from this schematic design and discretionary approvals content area. One of the main topics within that content area is agencies. So there are a number of agencies. They are broken into various types: federal, state, regional, and local agencies. These agencies typically exist for a number of reasons. The first reason is that some of these agencies will simply oversee a certain building type. So if you're designing a K-12 school project, if you're designing a hospital, there will be agencies that oversee those building types specifically. Another set of agencies may oversee a certain aspect of buildings, like accessibility, or like fire safety, or police safety. Those agencies exist to, really have more stringent and more streamlined requirements for whatever area that they're focusing on. And then the last subset of agencies are most likely existing to protect some sort of valuable resource. So they're not necessarily specific to architectural practice or the design and construction of buildings. It might be something like looking at air quality or looking at water quality, and then seeing how that building or construction project is going to affect their certain valuable resource. So we have the different types of agencies: federal, state, regional, local. They are typically overseeing a certain building type, a certain aspect of buildings, or a valuable resource. What is tricky about agencies is no two agencies are exactly the same. Some agencies will have review or permitting authority, some will not. So your job in being prepared for the CSE is that you'll need to understand which agencies will apply to a particular project and whether or not they will have review and or permitting authority. So if we go to the next slide, this is not an exhaustive list of agencies, but these are agencies that you should be aware of, and we've organized them by type. So for our federal agencies, we have U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, Federal Emergency Management Agency. More often than not, the federal agencies will not have permitting authority for your project in California. More likely they have some sort of review or oversight over a particular aspect, but not necessarily permitting authority. For state, regional, and local agencies, those agencies are more likely to have some sort of permitting authority over your project. So for the state agencies, we have Department of Healthcare Access and Information. That is abbreviated as HCI. It was formerly known as OSHPD. You may see that referred to as either OSHPD or HCI, and that agency is looking specifically at hospital buildings. We have the Division of State Architect, which looks at education buildings, Office of the State Fire Marshal, and then California State Water Resources Control Board. Under regional agencies, we have Regional Water Quality Control Boards, and under local agencies, we have Planning Department, Building Department, Fire Department, Department of Public Works, and if we can go to the next slide, there's a couple more local agencies. We also have the Transportation Department and Police Department. So within these two slides, we've identified a number of agencies that you should be familiar with. What I'd recommend, in addition to your Black Spectacle studying, is that you should go to the websites for each of these agencies and figure out whether or not they would have review or permitting authority for your project in California, and figure out what would trigger that permitting or review authority. For example, under state agencies, we have California Coastal Commission. Be ready to identify whether or not your project would need to would fall under the jurisdiction of the California Coastal Commission. If your project's not on the coast, probably not going to require review from the California Coastal Commission. How close, a question you might want to ask yourself is, how close to the coast would it trigger review from California Coastal Commission? So be researching these agencies. Ask yourself questions like, when would these agencies be triggered for review or permitting? And be aware of the processes you might need to go through to get permits from these agencies, and in what order. All right, if we can go to the next slide. So continuing on with the schematic design and discretionary approvals content area, another aspect you might want to be familiar with are environmental and local conditions to consider in California. And this is one of the main reasons why the California Architects Board feels it is necessary to have the CSE. The fact that California has such a varied climate and topography and environmental conditions, that architects in California really need to be able to handle all of these conditions, be familiar with and be able to handle all of those conditions. So these could include water, air, wetlands, endangered species, earthquakes, and wildfire. So some of these are related to those agencies we saw on the previous slide, some are not. Be ready and familiar with how to deal with these environmental conditions, how to determine whether this environmental condition exists on your site or not, and how to advise the client on issues like these. Continuing on with this content area, another key component is the California Environmental Quality Act. A lot of people just refer to it as CEQA. So this is an act, and it requires projects to not proceed if there is a feasible alternative that reduces environmental impact. And this term projects related to CEQA includes building and construction projects. It could also include other improvements that are projects that don't necessarily require the involvement of an architect. Maybe it's some sort of civil engineering, infrastructure update, something like that. Not necessarily requiring an architect, but would still be considered a project. If there is a project that happens to impact the environment in some way, it is reviewed under CEQA, and if it is found that, hey, there's actually another way to do this project without having such a big environmental impact, CEQA is essentially requiring that that project not proceed until that feasible alternative is redesigned, essentially. So your job related to CEQA is to understand what projects CEQA applies to, the various agencies involved, and the documentation process. The documentation process is quite substantial. I would recommend just a quick Google search on CEQA flowchart. There are a couple of great resources out there that show you the step-by-step process that you need to take with CEQA, even starting with determining whether or not your project is considered a true project under CEQA, all the way down to the various agencies that you'll have to work with to get this approved, and then any final documentation process or notices that you'll have to provide to the public that this is occurring. So CEQA is definitely an important one to be familiar with. Okay, next, for the same content area, again, there's a lot of information in this content area that is new to the CSE. You would want to be familiar with building types that have increased code and or permitting requirements. So again, these map quite well to a number of agencies that we showed on the previous slide. So essential services buildings. This is a pretty specific definition. Essential services buildings are buildings that provide essential services, and there is a specific list of which buildings are considered to fall under this category. So those buildings that provide essential services, such as a fire station, must be able to withstand a disaster event like an earthquake, like flooding, and still be functional. So the idea is that if there is some sort of disaster event in the state, that people will need to be able to receive services from buildings that are considered essential. So like the fire station, like a police station, for example. Those types of buildings that are essential to the service of the community should be structurally sound or sound in other ways to keep it robust against disaster events. So those buildings need to be able to be functional to prevent, the collapse of our main infrastructure of our communities. So essential services buildings have additional permitting requirements. Hospitals shall be operational after an earthquake. Earlier, I mentioned OSHPD and HCI. That agency is overseeing hospitals and has additional code and permitting requirements for hospitals. School projects have increased standards for structural, fire, life safety, and accessibility. And this is specifically schools that service young students between kindergarten and 12th grade, as well as community college projects. The idea is that we need to be protecting our youth and our most vulnerable populations. So those school buildings should have increased structural, fire, life safety, and accessibility requirements. So the agency I mentioned that relates to schools is the Division of the State Architect. It's a state agency, and they are overseeing the increased code and permitting requirements for those K through 12 or community college schools. So be familiar with these three building types. They will all have increased code and permitting requirements. If you are given a question that is asking about one of these three building types, your little internal sirens in your brain should be going off that, oh, this is a hospital project. This project is related to OSHPD and HCI, and this project has increased code and permitting requirements. Also included in this content area are your building codes. So the California Building Code is California's version of the IBC, and it is adopted with amendments. You should be familiar with the sections of the CBC that differ from the IBC. The layout and format is mostly the same. One chapter that you would want to be familiar with from the CBC is Chapter 11B, which has a lot of accessibility requirements. That chapter is similar to ADA 2010, but doesn't exist within the IBC. So that's definitely one that you'll want to actually open up the code and read through to be familiar with. Another section of the code for California is CalGreen. So CalGreen includes mandatory sustainable design requirements that the state has adopted. So yes, these are mandatory sustainability requirements. They are, for the most part, at a baseline level. So it is not anything that is, like a super far-reaching stretch for our projects in California. They are code requirements. They follow a lot of the same categories that LEED does, not every single one, but somewhat similar. I'm thinking about like sustainable sites, material use, indoor environmental quality, just to name a few of the categories within CalGreen. I'd recommend opening up CalGreen, looking at the various requirements. A lot of them, if you have worked on a LEED project before, a lot of those requirements will seem similar. And then lastly, I wanted to point out California Energy Code. commonly referred to as Title 24 calculations. These are mandatory energy calculations for certain regulated building components, like glazing. So there's a specific list of which building components are regulated under the California Energy Code. Glazing is one of them. This is typically something, at least in my experience, that the electrical engineer team will take care of. But for the purposes of the CSE, you should be familiar with which building components are regulated under the California Energy Code. Like, for example, for glazing, even if the electrical engineer is doing these calculations, we as the architects would want to be familiar with the glazing spec. We would want to be able to have our input on that. So be familiar with those regulated building components under California Energy Code. So these are 3 codes that you should be familiar with for the CSE. There are other sections of the code not listed here. It would be a good idea to just be familiar with, you know, what are the different chapters in the California Building Standards Code, and how do they differ from the IBC, and then definitely take a deeper dive into these 3. Okay, construction documents and permitting. So we're heading into a different content area now. So we'll want to obtain discretionary and final approvals. So for that topic of obtaining discretionary and final approvals, we'll want to be knowledgeable about navigating the process, including which agencies to engage and when. So this is when your research about agencies is going to come into play. You should be familiar with which agencies are going to have jurisdiction over your project from the start of the project, but you'll also need to be familiar with, okay, even though we've identified the agencies, what does that final approval process look like? This is an area where your work experience can definitely be beneficial. For my own experience, I tend to work on a lot of education projects. So I have experience working with Division of the State Architect, DSA. If you have work experience with another one of those agencies before, that's great. You're going to be an expert at the processes required for final approvals with those agencies. As always, something to be aware of when you are incorporating your work experience into your studying. Just be aware of when you did something for a project that was typical versus when you did something for a project that was atypical or unique, because more often than not, the CSE will be based around that typical condition. Unlikely that the CSE would be based around that unique condition or atypical thing that you did to get that project permitted that one time. So just be aware of that. You know, take a step back from your regular workday and just have a sense of what was typical and what wasn't for a particular project. Okay, this should be our last content area, project bidding and construction. We'll want to understand bidding requirements for public projects in California. So there are some specific requirements for public projects. Buildings under the jurisdiction of certain agencies like OSHPD and HCI for hospitals will require additional inspections. You will want to understand these requirements, which projects they apply to, and the overall process. So be familiar with, if you're just doing a standard project in California, what the bidding requirements would be like versus if you're doing an OSHPD HCI project versus if you're doing a DSA project. For California Civil Code, be aware of lien rights for contractors, subcontractors, and design professionals. So lien rights are essentially a contractor, subcontractor, or design professional's right to stake a claim on the property if something is not going well in the project. So you'll want to be aware of those lien rights so that you can advise the owner what the best course of action is. So just a couple of areas that you'll want to be familiar with for this specific content area that you hadn't already seen on the AREs. And I think that should wrap us up for our content for today.
Thanks, Marissa. Let's hop into a quick live Q&A. If you have any questions to bring up to Marissa about California practice or the CSE course that you've been going through, anything like that, you can go ahead and go to community.blackspectacles.com and a thread there called CSE Live Understanding California Practice. Go ahead and drop us a question there. And I already have one right now from those earlier by German. But they were essentially, they were just asking like, hey, how do I get this 10% discount? And we actually have that auto applied. So when you go to checkout, you'll see the discount code. I think it's save 10. You'll see that auto applied on your bill too. So already all you have to do is just go to checkout and that'll be auto applied and you're good to go too. And then one question that we also have out of this too is are all the questions multiple choice, correct? Yeah, that is correct. It is 100 multiple choice questions. And Marissa, do you have any other points to add for someone that's on the CSE exam around the multiple choice aspect of it?
What I've heard from a recent test taker is that there are no case study questions on the CSE.
Perfect.
So just straight up multiple choice.
Perfect, thanks. And then we have another one that is from Faith that's asking, are there any books similar to Ching to help understand the California codes?
Ooh, hey Faith, that is a great question. I don't think so. So I'm just going to take another opportunity to plug our Black Spectacles content where we do a deep dive into those code sections that are different from the IBC. And if you wanted to, I feel like some of the code websites that you may have access to, maybe Upcodes, they may have highlighted areas of the CBC that are different from the IBC. So you may also want to give that a look.
Great, thanks. And then we have one more that's a little bit more specific of what do we need to know about Title 24 specifically?
Well, I don't want to mess this up because this is a confusing topic.
Yeah.
Title 24, hopefully you'll discover this in your research, but even though we throw around the term Title 24 all the time in practice, that's not really the actual name of it. So when we say Title 24 and Title 24 calculations, most of the time what people are referring to are those energy calculations. And okay, so Title 24 calculations, when your electrical engineer says, oh, I'm going to do the Title 24 calculations, they are more than likely referring to the California Energy Code, which is describing the mandatory energy calculations for your building. And that's all fine. But technically, the term Title 24 is referring to the California Building Standards Code. So the California Building Standards Code, we don't have that written here, but the California Building Standards Code actually includes all of these 3 bullet points here, plus some additional code sections, like California Historical Building Code, for example, or California Residential Building Code are also included under the CBSC, California Building Standards Code. So now you know, Title 24 really means California Building Standards Code, which includes a bunch of different code sections, including these 3 important ones that I've highlighted here. So no need to correct your electrical engineer. I'm more than positive that when they're saying Title 24, they're referring to the calculations under the California Energy Code. Hopefully that answered your question. You can let us know if there was something else that I may have missed there.
Yeah, thanks. And then I just got 2 more questions, it looks like. And this one's around the Cal Green aspect of it. Is it true that the actual exam is heavily Cal Green content? Can you speak on that a little bit?
I would say that Cal Green content exists on the exam, but I wouldn't say that it's heavily weighted or all Cal Green. What I would say is that this content area, schematic design and discretionary approvals, is definitely heavily weighted on the exam, and it includes content for Cal Green, but it also includes a bunch of other content too that we discussed today, like CEQA, like the various agencies you'll need to be comfortable with. So it's still good to be familiar with Cal Green, but I wouldn't say that it's more heavily weighted than some of the other things that we talked about today.
Gotcha, thanks. And then I can answer this last one. H. Chavez is asking about, did I hear right that Black Spectacles provides a practice exam? And if close, how close is it to the actual exam that we have? And really the same thing that we've done for our ARE test prep, where we say this is as close to the real exam as you get. We use that same standard to create our CSE practice exam as well too. And include in there too is also a timer as well too, so you can simulate the real exam and it's as close to the real thing as you can get to. So your subscription is going to include everything from video lectures to practice exams to flashcards to quizzes, and it's all bundled up into our guided study process where you can click a 30 or 60-day plan and it'll give you a full layout of what you should be studying each day so you can stay on track. And this is aligned with your exam date as well too.
I will add that unlike those NCARB free practice exams, the California Architects Board unfortunately does not have any practice exams. I think they have like a couple questions on their website just so you can get a sense of it. But you won't find any California Architects Board practice exams like you would have for the NCARB exams.
Yeah, great. And then Marissa, looks like one more too. What AIA contracts should people also be looking at too, specifically for the CSE?
Yeah, I would look at, that's a great question. I would look at the same ones that you had already studied for the AREs. So I wouldn't advocate for any new AA contracts that you would need to look at for the CSE specifically. So all of the ones that you've already heard of, the A101, A201, B101, B201, and then maybe the consultant one, which I think is the C401. All of those owner architect and owner contractor agreements are all part of the CSE, but you wouldn't need to know anything more than what you already studied for the AREs. Hopefully that makes you feel good about your current status with your AREs.
Yeah, great, thanks. And then kind of one that goes off of that too, but someone, Ceton is asking, should we set a budget aside to buy the CBC codes and Cal Green, or does the course have everything that that we'll need to pass this exam?
The course will have everything you'll need to know about the California Building Code and Cal Green, but UpCodes is something that I just use in my day-to-day work, and UpCodes, I believe, has California Building Code available, and you would want to be looking at the 2022 version of the CBC for now. I don't think they have updated the exam yet to be covering 2025 CBC.
Great, thanks so much. With that, it looks like that is all of our questions. Marissa, once again, thanks so much for helping us out today. It's been a pleasure having you, and thanks so much for supporting the architecture community.
You're welcome.
If you're joining us for the first time, Black Spectacles is a leader in ARE prep. At Black Spectacles, we work with learning scientists and architects to ensure you're studying the right content and that you retain it so you can pass on the first try. And we're very excited to announce the launch of our brand new CSE course designed to help you pass the California Supplemental Exam in record time. You'll get everything you need to pass the CSE on your first try, including expert crafted California specific study materials, a practice exam that is as close to the real thing as you can get, customizable flashcards and quizzes, and a structured study plan customized to your exam date. You can join today at blackspectacles.com/CSE-pricing to take advantage of a 10% discount for the first 100 members. This discount is automatically applied at checkout, and if you're using Black Spectacles through your firm, be sure to let your firm leadership know so they can unlock access for your entire team. Our next CSE Live will be on October 15th, where we'll be covering a CSE mock exam. You can go to blackspectacles.com/podcast/CSE Live to sign up. And congratulations to H. Chavez. You posted on our community today and you just won a free Black Spectacles t-shirt. I'll reach out to you via email to get your size and shipping information, and I'll be in touch soon. And just a reminder, if you'd like to be eligible to win a free t-shirt, post a question you have about our featured topic in our community during our next CSE Live. And our community is always active, not just during CSE Live. So poke around and see what your peers are up to and asking about. Finally, be sure to take our survey, which you'll find in your email after this episode, and share any suggestions you may have. I promise we read every word that you write and use them to tune our next episodes. Thanks for tuning in.